3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the Politipop Podcast, a.k.a. Mad Facts Fury Bros, the podcast where we take your favorite pop culture media and discuss the social and political themes within. I am your co-host, Mike Booch, and I am joined, as always, by my spectacular co-host, Ty.
Hey, what's going on?
All right, dude, I'm feeling really good about this episode. I completely forgot, how awesome this movie was.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you were okay with it when I pitched it to you, because I feel like this is a really, really good film.
I think you have imposter syndrome, and you're kind of forgetting that you're also a co-host on the show. So, how many things have I suggested that you're just like, oh, I guess I'll just watch a completely new thing? And, okay, Mike says to do it. No, you're in it now. You're with me.
I go with the flow. I go with the flow.
Yeah, and I appreciate that because I do tend to take charge a little bit. But no, this was an awesome suggestion, and yes, it was yours to cover Mad Max Fury Road. And at the time, I was just like, oh, well, I remember it being a good movie, obviously. We'll talk a little bit about feminism and how cool the movie looks. I delved in a lot more than I thought I would. I got the prequel comic book trade paperback, which has stories in it that are canon to the movie. These stories were written by George Miller, the director of the Mad Max franchise, and the screenwriters, and a lot of the art was also done by the storyboard artists for the movie. So, these stories were also told to the actors in order for them to get into character.
It's got a really cool backstory because I believe it was 1991 that they were going to originally make Fury Road, and things kind of fell by the wayside. And then in the 2000s, they started, playing it again. And I think they had storyboarded a bunch of stuff. And I think it was 2004, and nothing came of it still. But the person who did the storyboards actually pitched, a comic book to Miller. And, at the time, they didn't work on it. But then years later, when Fury Road came out in 2015, Miller called him up and said, you know what, that comic book, yeah, let's do it. And these were like I said, these were stories that were told to the actors. They were thought up way before the movie came out to flesh these characters out. So they're not just a cash grab. So they're really fulfilling. I like the art a lot. I really enjoyed them. I thought it was a really good read.
And for those of you who are uninitiated, you have to know that if they make a comic book into a movie, that's one thing. But when you make movies and shows into comic books, it doesn't always transfer over well, and it is a lot of times, like you said, Ty, a cash grab. It's not something that that's done out of the genuine passion for the story, but this absolutely was. So it was a very pleasant surprise. I was a little hesitant to read it, but I did, mostly just because I wanted Furiosa's backstory, but it also has backstories on Immortan Joe and his rise to power, which was awesome. Nux, and Mad Max's story just before this story picks up.
Yeah, it's really important.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in detail in a bit. I had a little bit of housekeeping. Did you have anything you wanted to talk about that wasn't directly related to the movie?
No, I'm good. You do your thing.
All right. So listen, if you, the listener, have not heard or watched Trump's HBO Axios interview, please look it up on YouTube and find the full interview. It is one of the saddest and most hilarious things you'll ever watch. You'll get to see Trump wish well a child sex trafficker, Ghislaine Maxwell. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing the name correctly, and probably not. But he says he wishes her well. He acknowledges that Epstein probably was murdered in prison. He says he didn't like John Lewis because he didn't come to his inauguration. And he also has a lot of difficulty reading very basic graphs on the COVID-19 pandemic. The most basic, to the point that there's actually so little information, it is tough to read. You'll see that and more. So,
Did you hear the theory, by the way, about him wishing Ghislaine Maxwell well? Wishing her the best? Oh, is it
like a mafia hit that he called? He's like, I wish her well. Wink.
Well, Scaramucci claims that that's what he does when he's trying to tell them, I'll take care of you, keep your mouth shut. Apparently he's done it a few times with some of the other people that have, in his circle that have, been on trial and things like that. So I don't know if it's accurate or not, but that's kind of funny to think about. He's like, I'll take care of you. All right. So it is kind of mafioso like.
Listen, if I'm going to take someone's word for it, it's going to be the mooch himself. Seriously. No, I mean, he does have, and you've heard it from people who have talked about meetings with Trump and stuff, that he does kind of think of himself and handle himself like a mob boss. So I can absolutely see that checking out 100%. Also, I know like sometimes we save it for the end, like the cool stuff we're getting into, but I just got into this comic book by Robert Kirkman. You may know him from his writing on The Walking Dead, Invincible. He also wrote Outcast, which was turned into a TV show. But he has this comic book called Die, Die, Die. You and I know about it, obviously, Ty, because we're big Kirkman heads. But I finally started reading it, and it is hilarious and amazing. It's this like completely wild action shoot 'em up story that's just like borderline grindhouse, but also has these moments in it.
Yeah, it's super over the top, super violent. And the best part was that it was released surprisingly, right? Like out of nowhere, it was just on the shelves because Kirkman wanted to surprise people. So there had been nothing leading up to it to let people know he was releasing it. And now it's a regular comic book.
I'm actually trying to see if it's still continuing because I want to decide if I'm going to purchase the trade to finish out all the issues I wasn't able to collect.
He took a break. So it is supposed to keep going, though.
Might be worth it then. But there was this one moment in the comic book. I'd just like to read a monologue from it. It's this like very powerful senator woman who she also directs like a bunch of for-hire killers. And she's having this question of morals, this discussion of morals on the way to an anonymous masked sex party. She says this, and I felt that it would relate to us and our listeners. I mean, if you're still listening at this point, or you started listening, it's, you probably feel the same way we do about the state of the world. But she says, don't ever justify something to me by saying that's how it's always been done. I'd be pushing my fifth baby out of my twat and onto the kitchen floor next to my bare fucking feet if that was an acceptable justification for anything. If our job is to make things stay the same way they are, then what the hell are we even doing? Isn't the whole point of things to make things better? What? Isn't the whole point of this to make things better? What things? What things? All fucking things. And if things are ever really great, fuck that. They can always be better. I wanted to be a civil servant because I'm disgusted by where we've ended up as a society. At what point did we decide everything was fine the way it was and stop progressing? Is this it? Is this the best we can hope for? Rich people and poor people, the elite and the rest? Working all our lives to earn enough money to stop working before we die? You think that was the be-all, end-all goal we had in mind when we first gathered around a fire to hunt together? Hell fucking no, it wasn't. And I thought that was an amazing monologue.
That's awesome.
Put in there by this woman, despite the fact that she's also one of the elites and engaged in a bunch of nefarious activity.
Yeah, so like the ends justify the means kind of thing, right? She's trying to do the right thing by doing some bad things.
Yeah, one of those. So, speaking of doing some bad things in order to do the right thing and questioning capitalism and I honestly didn't think that this would be a critique about capitalism and a rallying cry for socialism like some of our other podcasts are, but here we are. It turns out that all of our favorite works happen to have that theme in it. So now I'm starting to question less and less about where we've ended up where we have.
Yeah.
So we're going to be reviewing Mad Max Fury Road, a franchise in which the first 3 installments starred Mel Gibson, who cannot and will not return.
But it was early in his career, you know what I mean? I don't think he was out and about as a racist yet.
Yeah, he wasn't like, hi, I'm Mel Gibson, I hate cheese.
Yeah.
Like
it was Australian, he was doing the accent and everything.
Yep, and it took, and then the accent faded from his acting.
Yeah.
But we are in a more modern 4th installment starring Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron. And Ty, do you want to give them the plot?
Absolutely. Mad Max Fury Road. In a post-apocalyptic wasteland, a woman rebels against a tyrannical ruler in search for her homeland with the aid of a group of female prisoners, a psychotic worshiper, and a drifter named Max.
I love how they got that so right, because this really isn't Max's movie. He's not the main protagonist.
Arguably not. You know, I don't really think there is like a main protagonist though. You know, like it is definitely like a group effort. Furiosa, I think, probably steals the show, but they definitely, you know, all have a role to play. And this is kind of, I think, the Mad Max movie that he always wanted to make, Miller. You know, I think this is like what he dreamed it was possible of being. And in 2015, he was able to accomplish that by breaking all screenwriting rules and making just a nonstop, you know, pulse-pounding action thriller with a lot of great themes.
And that's such a great way to describe it, too, because when I was watching this movie and trying to take notes, I realized I had to, like, pause every time. Not since reviewing Parasite did I have to do that because I didn't understand the language. But this is the kind of movie that if you truly do look away, like, if you blink, you could miss something awesome. Like, there's not a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of visuals.
Yeah, I mean, Max has very few lines, you know, for being the title character. He barely talks.
I'd also like to point out that this is our second movie back-to-back with V for Vendetta that have women with shaved heads in it. So.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So, I don't know about you. I'm going to be going all around the movie in this interview. I'm going to try and keep it somewhat like going from the beginning of the film to the end of the film. But between all the sources and the comic book as well, we might be going all over. But there's going to be a good time. So, starting off at the beginning of the movie, we see that we get some sound snippets as to how the world ended. But like specifically as we learn more about the story, and if you read the comic, we understand that basically environmental degradation has caused the end of the world, and that there were battles for resources very quickly, like water and gas became the most prized commodities. And Max kind of describes this, and he says it was harder to know who was more crazy, me or them. And this really spoke to me because we talked about it before during our Last Night on Earth episode about kind of being gaslit and being made to believe that you're the one who's wild because you don't want to conform to a wild world. I don't really like using the word crazy. Sorry, you can use it if you want, but yeah. But yeah, it is very, very interesting to think about that. Like the world now in the Mad Max universe, the norm is to fight for everything you have and be completely ruthless in it and try to get resources, screw over everybody else, and only look out for yourself. And Max is kind of, you know, because he seems to be of the old world. He is very traditional. He mentions that he was a cop. It seems like the world is moving on and he's not moving with it. Does that make him nuts or does that make the world nuts?
I mean, in some ways, though, you know, it's called Mad Max, right? And he is very unhinged in this movie, especially compared to the original trilogy. You know, there's a lot of different theories about it, and, you know, it's sort of almost a reboot / continuation. So, you know, they took Tom Hardy and they had him play him in a very wild, manic way. You know, even when he talks, it's very quick and you know, doesn't say a lot of words. So, you know, obviously the world has taken its toll on Max, and we see that almost immediately as he's, you know, has this opening voiceover. He crushes the lizard and starts eating it. You know, it's there's definitely something, you know, off about him at this point.
Now, in the comic book, we see that his story, they do their best to keep it canon from the original story. They even go so far as to put Tom Hardy's face in the Mel Gibson role for the earlier films as they go back and do it. Very talented artwork, I believe. And we see that his whole story has really been like he's going throughout the world, and he ends up finding random groups of people, or maybe a person here, a person there. And while he accepts certain jobs, it seems like he's really trying to help people. And then at the end of the movie, he just goes on his way. He's the road warrior. He, you know, goes wherever the wind takes him, Bruce Banner style in the original Incredible Hulk show.
He's a reluctant hero, right? Like he, you know, at first he doesn't want to ever get involved, but, you know, seeing somebody in danger, you know, seeing people suffering, you know, it's rooted in him to be the hero. You know, and if you go back to the original Mad Max, you know, his family was murdered by a biker gang, right, in that movie. And that kind of like set him forth, you know, on this almost like revenge. I have to, you know, fight people in the wasteland. But, you know, he just, it's in him to help people when he can.
Yeah, and we see that this movie isn't necessarily different. When we meet him at the beginning of the movie, he's actually coming off of trying to help a mother and daughter. We don't know this in the movie; we know this from the comic. But he, throughout the movie, we see like him having flashbacks of like this child and a woman, and really you think it's his daughter and his wife.
Yep. What a bold move to not have it be them, right? And have you not know who they are unless you read the comic.
What a wild move. And I was so glad when I found that out, because I was like, all right, there's a cool story. And I was like, no, wait, it goes directly into the movie. But yeah, he has this whole story where this woman helps him in a Thunderdome fight. He helps her get her daughter back. And then he's also trying to get his car. And at the end of it, they're like, oh, you could come with us. We trust you. And he leaves them. And when he does, they die. And we see that experience fuels a lot of his actions in this movie.
Yeah, he's haunted by it. I mean, he sees this little girl constantly, and it's a driving force for his redemption. I think he even uses that word at one point. He says this is a chance for our redemption. He'll say to Furiosa later on. So it's definitely driving him to do the right thing, and that's what drives him to help out these characters later on.
Another thing about this part of the world is that it has been occupied by this tyrant who's called Immortan Joe. We don't get much about him in the movie. I mean, we get enough. We don't really need much more, but we do get a lot more about him in the comic as well, that he used to be in the military and he kind of led this mob of raving men with guns who really took over in the apocalypse. It's almost like they were waiting for this moment to happen, and when they did, they thrived so much.
I was going to compare him to my favorite person, Jeff Bezos, because people are they're bootlickers for him. He gives them water. He shares this resource that he controls. He's this powerful figure that, people love, and he's providing this something that they need. But should he even have that resource, right? He took it. It's not his to really give. It should be to everyone's. And they love him. They chant his name. He's a hero to them. He's a larger than life figure. He's obviously the 1% in this weird, strange world. He takes what he wants, and everyone listens to him. And it's on the backs of the people that are working for him, right? Like, he literally sacrifices everybody and anything to get what he wants. He has wives that he rapes so he can have children. He has his warboys that die very young, and then he has like these people that have nothing, and I love that line when he says to them, don't get addicted to water. You'll just resent it more when it's gone. And why is it gone? Because you won't give them any more water. You give them just enough to keep them alive and wanting more. And it's just, you just see that today with so many billionaires and people, the 1%, the people who just love them, right? And will defend them to the end of time because, they did something that we couldn't. They've earned it, when they really just, stepped on the backs of so many people.
And really we see that these people are simping so hard for billionaires and the 1% because they have a minuscule chance of one day being among them. And this reminds me of Nux's story, which we find out in the book. In the movie, I was originally led to believe that all of the warboys were his children, but it turns out that they're not. A lot of them are just recruited from the dregs of humanity below. And Nux was one of those. He was searching for a father, and he ended up holding on and making his way to the platform, and he became one of the warboys. Like, he had the chance, and even then, he still isn't even close to Immortan Joe's stature or status, but wants to be noticed by him and wants to be useful to him and wants to die for him as well.
Well, Immortan Joe uses religion, right, to like manipulate these people as well. He tells them, if you die for me, if you die heroically, you'll go to the Gates of Valhalla. Later on he says, I'll carry to the gates myself. And so people are like, wow, this promise of the afterlife and resources. They listen to every word he says and they eat it up.
No, I want to take a moment to talk about Joe and then move on to his commodifying of human lives, because we see his physical form, and I didn't recognize this until I started reading a paper, which I'll link to in the notes, Definitely, if you have the time, go ahead and read it, because it makes some great, and I don't mean you in particular, I mean the listeners. If you have time, go ahead and read it. It makes some really great comparisons between Joe and how he represents the themes of toxic masculinity and how he represents capitalism as well. And just like you said, Ty, how he's using bodies to achieve his means, similarly to how Bezos, is mistreating his Amazon workers and yet being flaunted for donating 1% of his net worth to people. But yeah, so Joe, his physical form, like at one time he was a very strong and intimidating man. Like he earned that citadel. He threw people at it. He went in and fought tooth and nail to get the citadel. Now, the Citadel is an area in the wasteland unlike any other. It is full of greens and water and resources that Joe is the one who controls it. Now, when we see him in the movie, he's much older at this point. He's been infected from all of the radioactivity in the area and all of the sicknesses that the land carries. So he has these like oozing pustules on his body. He's old. He wears this mask so that way you can't see his face. And the mask is made to have him look intimidating. The armor he puts over himself is clear. It's actually a plastic shell, but it's made to resemble muscles over a flabby body that has none. Like he's trying to show just how tough of a man he is. He's still trying to be revered, despite the fact that he has incredibly thin skin, relating to a lot of leaders we have today, namely one. And also we do see that he has this huge codpiece, like this metal symbol. It looks like a metal dinner plate with a skull on it over his crotch to imply that he is this well-endowed man who is like so virile and everything. That's why he's the only one who has a bunch of wives, so that way he can make the perfect kid. He really is an absolute monster of a man who's not long for this world, but he's holding on to the old world and bringing that into the new world. Does that make sense the way I said it?
It does, yeah. And I think, he really wants a viable successor. And all of his children are deformed in some way, whether it's physically or mentally, whatever it might be. None of them are fit to actually take over. And he's so obsessed with having that perfect child that will take over as the ruler when he's gone. So he has these wives, that are all healthy, beautiful, and he repeatedly rapes them to try and have a healthy child. And I think it's in the comic book they mention they get a certain amount of chances, right? And then once I think it's like 3, and if they can't give a healthy baby, then they're thrown out. But and he has a favorite who's pregnant right now that he believes will be his successor.
Yeah, now he kind of has this natural way about him, and once again, I'm gonna harken back to the old white cis heteronormative man that this represents, like this older guy, normally conservative, who's like, oh, like things have to be natural, like you can't have abortions, you can't have birth control, everything has to be natural, it's the strong over the weak, everything has to be natural, while not acknowledging how unnatural the way that he operates is. And with Joe, we see in the comics that he actually needs a male enhancement drug to keep himself erect the entire night, so he can rape all 5 of these women. And we're sorry for continually throwing the word around, but that's exactly what it is. Like, I don't want to Thomas Jefferson this thing and be like, oh, he has 5 wives, consenting wives. No, he has 5 women that he gives the bare minimum to. He gives
that he calls freedom. He calls them freedoms.
He calls them freedoms. But he's raping them, and in the comic, that one of them says that she actually she got raped anally. They're like, yeah. She's like, oh, I'm sore, and they're like, oh, we're all sore, and she's like, well, I'm not, where he puts it, there's no chance of having a kid. Which, just goes to show, like, he may say, like, he's about family and legacy and having a successor, but he's really just about his own pleasure. Now, one of the freedoms that he gives these women, which is his mistake, is he gives them a history woman. I believe her name is Giddy. I believe that another name for these history people is word burgers, where they're just people who have words tattooed over every inch of their body, and they are tasked with remembering the history of mankind. Most of the stories, actually all the stories in the comic book, are told by the new word burger, because Giddy unfortunately doesn't make it. And he has he has a few great quotes. One of them is about Immortan Joe. He says, "A true leader does not need others to make him strong. A true leader gives others the strength to stand alone." Tyrant. And I thought that was great. It was
I love that.
Yeah, it was very prescient to the time. But he also says, by giving them their own word woman, their own word burger, he says, knowledge has a way of dissent and inviting revolution. And that was so great right there. It kind of reminds me of, like, you ever seen that meme where it's like, oh, my parents, go off to college so you can get smart. Me, goes to college and learns more about, life and history, comes back and they're like, oh, you became a libtard, brainwashed, liberal, blah, 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 like all that stuff. Like, but that, that's the thing here is that, like we see in our own world that we have people who are very against funding education. And I think it's because it's easier to rule over ignorant people.
Yeah, definitely. They don't know any better, right? And these women, they learn, they're educated, and they realize, that they could have a better life. They should have a better life.
I just want to read a couple of other parts that the word burger had for us, where he mentions that in the world after Immortan Joe, spoilers, Immortan Joe gets toppled at the end, that it's a place where all are equal and everyone is provided for. And he also mentions the big goal of this is to not make the mistakes of the past. He says, we blindly follow history, repeating the mistakes of the past, and recreate the problems we try to avoid. For nothing can be solved if we use the same behaviors that caused the problem in the first place. Better to know our history, to understand what it tells us not to do.
Well said, Wordburger.
Right? He burgered the hell out of those words. We do see that with Immortan Joe and his dystopia, utopia, whatever you want to call it. And we see that with where we are as a country as well, that our whole system is still based off of a constitution that was written so long ago that we're trying to hold on to a history. Same thing. We already spoke about Confederate statues and all that bullshit. We're trying to hold on to these old relics that got us here in the first place, when we really should be looking in other directions to provide a more just society as we progress by doing things we haven't done before.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that.
Now, Ty, before you brought up his quote where he says, "Do not, my friends, become addicted to water," which he calls aqua-cola. Even in this world, he's still invoking the message of capitalism.
Yeah.
It's not just water; it's aqua-cola. When he tells everyone they're going to go to Valhalla, he says that they're going to make feast with the heroes of all time. McFeast invoking McDonald's. Like, what came to mind when I heard this was where our government stands with healthcare. How it's very much like, healthcare is a privilege. You shouldn't want more. You shouldn't want cheaper. You shouldn't want universal healthcare. Blah blah blah. Meanwhile, it's brought to light in a pretty stark contrast that Joe is telling his people, don't become addicted to water, which is the very thing they need to survive. We're being told that we should accept having only minuscule resources to survive as well. And I'm not just talking about the Republicans either. How their whole plan is pretty much just repeal Obamacare and have the free market, let it work its way out. But same thing with Democrats. Very few Democrats are for healthcare for all. I'm not sure I could really name any. Yeah,
Bernie, right? Bernie.
Well, and Democrat, on paper.
Yeah, I mean, I think AOC does. There's like that group of leftist Democrats, because it's a large tent. It's a big tent, so they got a lot of people in there. But yeah, I mean, definitely, Immortan Joe tells people not to get addicted to water. They have to conserve that resource, but they have so much of it to give. And the people up top with him are not nearly as many. and he's not really sharing with them either. So, he's telling them that, they can't have this because, they shouldn't want it. They won't have it to spare, but they do. And it's the same thing with healthcare, right? They tell us they can't do it. It's not feasible when it is, when there are plans out there, when there are countries that are doing it already. And it's something that we could accomplish if we wanted to. But again, it comes down to money, right? Big Pharma has their money in the pockets of many politicians, and a Morton Joe, obviously it's within his best interest to keep people needing him to provide water, because that's how he keeps them in line.
And this feeds into something I learned about less than 24 hours ago called necropolitics. And from what I understand, necropolitics is...
Necromancers, or?
I wish it was necromancy.
Damn.
But necropolitics is a little more sinister than necromancy would be. Necropolitics means being able to control who lives and who dies, and that's where true sovereignty is granted. And Morton Joe has that sovereignty. He controls not only who lives and who dies, but also how they live. Not dissimilar to where our government stands with us as well. We have let's just take a few of the people that Joe have working for him. He has the milking women, who are these women who just sit around all day. Most likely, also women, if they're not old wives, like former wives that he had, then he's definitely these women are getting pregnant and lactating somehow, and their whole job is just to make mother's milk. He has them there like a dairy farm. Commentary on the dairy industry in our country? I don't know, maybe. Doesn't really seem to be a part of this movie. But he also has like the treadmill rats, who are people who they walk on a treadmill all day to make power and to operate all the mechanics. He also has his warboys, which are, namely the biggest part of his operation next to his wives. The warboys are this cult that, like you said before, they're worshiping him, and their goal is to die for his vision.
Yeah. They want his approval, right? They want to keep him happy and alive, and his world, operating as it is, and that's their end goal. That's all they care about. And it's kind of a sad goal, right? Imagine your whole existence so you can hopefully die heroically. It's kind of depressing. And there's even children. There's the war boys, come from they're called war pups, right? They're like little kids that are already...
They indoctrinate them young.
Yeah, that are put to work immediately and trained until they're at the end of their life, and then they sacrifice themselves. So child labor right there.
And also early indoctrination. AOC recently has talked about introducing a bill that's going to end federal funding for the military to recruit in schools. And there's this one author who retweeted her, and his name is Clint Watts. I don't know exactly where his politics stand. You can check out his Twitter if you want. It's just @Clint Watts. But he says that he says strongly oppose AOC. Military is one of the best options for low-income people to earn a living, gain housing, and earn lifelong job skills. What is the bill offering as a replacement? And this right there is feeding into those same necropolitics. Like he wants war boys. Our military-industrial complex is made up of war boys. From early ages, we see all the movies and stuff. In the shows, soldiers being fucking soldiers and everything. And then we see it in our video games. We see it in our sporting events now. You have people who are totally pro-military, making themselves known at sporting events, yet somehow anti-politics at sporting events, whatever. But that's exactly what we do here. It really blows my mind.
The fact that so many people support that stuff too is just, they just don't understand. They're not seeing, the reality of it.
Yeah, and people really don't have a problem with this. I'm gonna go to this other article I found from decentfilms.com. This is a very problematic article. It's called "We Are Not Things." It's this pro-feminist but pro-life yet anti-Islam message. They kind of relate the warboys to radical Islamic extremists, which, I mean, I guess, but I think this movie is very purposefully making these characters white people.
Yeah, I mean, they literally like paint themselves white. So
yeah, they're covered in powder. They're like made very specifically to be white. Which, yes, I know there can be white Muslims, but I guess, but I think it's really it's condemning the capitalism extremist movement, because we're not, that's the normal thing. We're raised into buying and wanting to get money and have jobs just to work until we die, like the woman said in Die. This article also quotes the video that went around in 2015 that was like, abortion clinics are profiting off of the bodies of fetuses and stuff. Like, it quotes that, which you can see in the show notes. I have a factcheck.org article which is debunking the Planned Parenthood video. So you can get into all of that there. But it was interesting how in this article they say, like, that young babies are being used for as a commodity in order to get capital. It's human lives, literally. That's what they thought this movie was about. But they completely missed the military industrial complex, and they're angry about abortion, but not the fact that expendable human lives are really what fuel the capitalist machine. That they're not upset about the casualties of the Iraq and Afghanistan war, also in the show notes. They're not upset about the actually, this article did come out a while ago, so they wouldn't have known about COVID-19. But, you do have those people that are more upset about Planned Parenthood doing, 3% of their work being abortions instead of the 158,000 people who died from COVID-19 or the 4.8 million confirmed cases. And, really, this is all in the U.S., excuse me. But this is all for the sake of capitalism. We see that you've been forced to work throughout this whole pandemic because the government's not going to do its job to take care of you as a working person. And people are being forced back into work. They'd rather reopen the economy and risk lives than keep people safe.
And the scariest part is they've convinced a lot of people that's the best option. I've heard some people go, let's just open the economy already, Like, I want to go to work. And it's like, why? Why do you... they don't want to get a government handout. A, why not, right? And B, is it really a handout when we pay taxes all the time? So it's really kind of our money anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that's honestly how I look at it. There's also, all these ideas of like, there's links in the show notes about communism myths and the idea of capitalism versus communism versus socialism, because this movie does have a very pro-socialist message. It turns out a lot of the stuff that we're looking at, V for Vendetta, like everything kind of has socialist messages. Star Trek, like it all had that in there, and we didn't realize it before. Yet for some reason, socialism is always related to communism, where there's no movie that really has like communist, like pro-communist messages.
Yeah, well, in the world we haven't really seen true communism either. What Russia became, what China became, that's not true communism anyway. But I think, it comes down to a lack of the proper education for us, right? We didn't understand what socialism was. We just assumed it was all bad, Damn commies, right? That's all you think. Yep. I always equated communism and Nazis as being equally as bad. And then you realize, when you really think back, well, communists fought against Nazis, right? So it's a very eye-opening situation as you learn more about, politics in the world and you figure these things out. So, I think a lot of people who are artists that are making these projects understand the benefits of socialism and, what could be accomplished if we, utilized it more. And we're seeing it in these projects.
And going back to that abortion argument as well, when we talk about reproductive rights, there is a moment in the comic book where one of the wives tries to perform a home abortion on herself, and Furiosa stops her. And after that, that's when Immortan Joe puts the chastity devices on the wives, because he wants to control every aspect of their reproductive freedom. Which I like how they kind of get down to the bare bones of it, that a lot of laws that, all the laws that are put forth in our country to curtail and chip away at reproductive rights, they're not there for safety. They're there for control. It's not because you want to worry about the life of that baby, because once that baby's born, you want to indoctrinate it and send it off to be a war boy, or you want to just throw them to the wheels of capitalism and see what happens. You need more workers. You need more people working to fuel the machine that keeps people rich.
I think in the comic, Toast the Knowing, played by Zoe Kravitz in the movie, actually calls it a rape device instead of a chastity device, because and that's what it is. It's not to help them, it's to hurt them. It's to keep hurting them.
Yeah, hurting them for resisting, hurting them for saying no. So speaking of people who said no, we do learn through the comic and through the movie that Furiosa herself used to be one of Immortan Joe's wives.
Yeah, it's they never really come out and say it. So that's one of the projects that's in the works now, is her origin story. But basically, they in the comic they say, you were one of his wives, weren't you? She just doesn't really say yes or no, but you can kind of take her absence of words as confirmation. And she's missing a hand, right? She's missing like part of her arm. And she's just like, some bad things happened and I lost my arm. And during an interview with Charlize Theron, she did confirm that she had, her character, Furiosa, was a wife who was infertile. And I guess she was either punished by Joe or fought back against Joe. And I think he must have taken her arm for that. But she wound up, proving herself as a very strong warrior. And he made her, one of his top, lieutenants, so to speak, in his army.
I do like this idea that Furiosa doesn't have to acknowledge her history in order to be an ally to these people. Like, she kind of starts off as being part of Immortan Joe's crew and telling these women that they should be lucky that they have so much freedom, that they're not scrounging to survive like everybody else. And this kind of reminds me of like those, like your Tommy Larens and your Candace Owenses and a lot of right-wing commentators who are like, for whatever reason, like anti Me Too or anti their own race in the case of Candace Owens. It just shows that regardless of Furiosa's history, like, you could still be an ally without having to have suffered the same injustices.
Well, I think the thing with Furiosa is maybe not necessarily that she believes that's the right thing, but she doesn't see any other options. We do know for a fact that she was kidnapped as a child. Her mom was killed or died, and she has been raised in this place. So I don't necessarily think she maybe believes in that, but there are not many options out in the wasteland. It's a bad place, which they bring up quite a few times about how bad it can be out there. This is one of the better places to be, as horrible as that sounds. Obviously, it could be much better if everyone had access to the resources that are here. But, Furiosa, she kind of reminds me of Max, to be honest. She is a reluctant hero. She doesn't at first want to help these women. She doesn't, think it's something that she has to do. But seeing them suffer, getting to know them, it brings out something in her that makes her realize she can use her strength to rescue them. And she does hatch an escape plan to get them out of the Citadel.
I also like how Furiosa, her arm, we'll have to presume, was made by the organic mechanic. It was made by Joe's regime.
Yep.
And she uses that arm as part of her resistance. Like, she, up until the very end, when Joe is dead, that arm, it kind of is with her as both a help and a hindrance, maybe as if to represent that trauma, but she's using it to help others. She's using it for something better.
Yeah, she actually uses that arm to kill Joe, which I thought was fantastic.
Now, what I read that somewhere as well, but I thought she put like a spear in his mask and then attached the spear chain to a wheel, and then her arm got ripped off with it. Like, she does use that hand to attach it, or did I not see it correctly?
I think she grabbed his mask with the hand and undid the latch and let it drop into the wheel, and it pulled his face with it.
All right. Well, we'll both check it out at a different time, and listeners, you check it out too.
I did watch it twice when I was watching that scene, because I was like, I wanted to see how it happened, and that's what
I'm taking your word for it, because I only watched it once and then just went about my day, and I was like, we'll see about that. I actually want to talk about Nux for a bit.
Sure. Played by Nicholas Hoult, great actor.
Yes, and well done, very well at that. His whole place as a war boy plays into some of the text that was left around, the graffiti that was left in the Citadel where the wives lived. At one point, they wrote, "We are not things," which, we already covered that. We already talked about how, the commodification of a woman's body as an incubator for babies, as opposed to actual people who have a right to control that. But they also wrote, "Our babies will not be warlords," kind of talking about breaking that cycle that Nux is in the middle of when we see him in this movie. We do see that he's weak, and the whole reason he's brought into the story is because they hook up Max to him. And it's interesting that this is the beginning of his transformation as he starts taking a blood transfusion from Max. Not that exactly, obviously. The story leads into becoming a better and different person, but, that's the beginning of his transformation. He's this war boy. He wants to prove himself. And I want to note that he tries to sacrifice himself 3 times for Immortan Joe in this movie and fails at every one of them.
Yeah, it's almost played a comical relief eventually, right? I think Immortan Joe says mediocre in his last attempt, and it's like he doesn't really care about these war boys. If they can't accomplish what he wants, then they're nothing to him.
Well, there's one guy earlier who also had a sacrifice, and his I want to say his coworkers, his coworker war boys, they also call him mediocre when he dies for the cause. And it's like, it's more of a performance and less of a sacrifice, which, back to our own military, that's very much the same thing, that, these poor guys, say what you will, maybe misled by the American dream or by patriotism, go to, quote, fight for their country and end up giving their lives only to have it politicized, right? We hear dead soldiers as an excuse for why black people shouldn't kneel during the national anthem. Like, it is more about the performance, about more of being politicized than the true essence of martyrdom, of sacrificing the few for the many.
Yeah, and it's played, like you said, very theatrically in this. It's like, witness me, and everyone cheers them on, they kill themselves, and they move on, right? It's just like this big, wow, that was entertaining. No one seems to really mourn each other or care that someone has died.
Now, I'd like to spoil what happens at the end with Nux. He ends up finding a cause that's finally worth dying for, and does so. He sacrifices himself and the war rig, so that way the rest of I'm going to call them the Resistance, Furiosa's crew, which, contains the wives, Max, and the Vuvolini, who we haven't even touched on yet.
Yeah, they come much later.
Yeah, he allows them to escape and go back to take the Citadel after overthrowing Immortan Joe. And it really is interesting how the whole time, he's being very loud, and he's like, witness me, like trying to make a performance of it. And there's only one person who witnesses him, and it's that wife, who I don't know her name off the top of my head, but it's the one that he's kind of been bonding with this whole time.
Capable.
So he points to Capable at the very end, and he just whispers, witness me, and topples the rig and kills himself, and in doing so, blocking the rest of the war parties and saving the main characters, the main crew. It is this interesting commentary, at least from the way I'm looking at it, of like, what do you really want to die for? What's the hill you want to die on? Do you want to die on that hill of capitalism and of sacrificing for somebody who doesn't even know your name, who believes that it's mediocre? Or do you want to, really die for a good cause? And, something you and I have been talking about in previous episodes too, that's what the choice Nux has to make.
Well, I think it's kind of poetic. He actually is finally witnessed, right? Like, the other warboys, Joe, they don't actually care if he dies. Capable does. She cares about him. They formed, a very strong bond over the last day or two, even. And she watches him die, and it's a very sad moment for her. And it feels like he did something that he'll be remembered for truly. And when they're talking about this mission, he says it sounds like hope. And I think for the first time, something in him has awakened that he's like, wow, this is what I want to die for, this mission here.
What's interesting is this kind of goes back to Okja too. Remember, the one kid who was the truck driver in the first part of the movie, and then at the end he's like the social media guru who's totally fighting for the animal liberation front.
Yep.
Like, once you have something that really ignites that passion, it's also interesting to see that Nux from the beginning he's really a scared little boy. The whole reason he went to Immortan Joe in the first place is because he was looking for his father.
After his mother died right next to him.
Yeah, his mother died after being sick from all the radiation. He's on his last legs too. Like, kind of everybody is sick. One of the few people who isn't is Max, which is why he's chosen to be the blood bag. He's, they tattoo on Max at the beginning of the movie all of the things that he's good for. They also mention, if you take a close look, that not only is he a universal donor, not only is he healthy, but his genitals are also good.
Oh, really? I didn't even catch that.
Yeah, neither did I. That was in one of the articles, right?
Oh.
Not the anti-abortion one in the scholarly article that was written with actual sources. But they do mention that also men are commodified in this culture that Joe is putting into this world. And Joe really isn't doing anything new, right? Like, we're making all these comparisons between our current world and that world, our current world and that world. That's what it is. It's capitalism. That's all it is. Is Immortan Joe is taking what he knows from the previous world and now just putting himself at the top of the exact same system that destroyed the world in the first place.
It's post-apocalypse capitalism, and that's it's not so far from the truth. As wacky as this world is. A lot of it, I think, could actually happen. Whether it happens exactly the same way, probably not. But you're definitely you would see people take advantage, right? And they would capitalize on any kind of resources they can get their hands on. I also like that they call I think they call Max a full life, and Nux is referred to as being at his the end of his half life. I guess because of the radiation and all that, they don't live too much of an older age. Where Max is, a healthy adult who will live, pretty long naturally.
Yeah, and Max being a healthy adult plays into this other theme that the one article was talking about kind of masculinity, and how every character has their own idea of masculinity in this movie. Which obviously we had a toxic masculinity episode when we talked about Lord of the Rings with Frankie. But this was an interesting look at it. It was in no way anything any conclusion I would have come to, but it's kind of talking about how, like, Max still has this tough masculinity about him, but he's also, like, he's quiet. He knows when to let Furiosa take the lead when he can't snipe, and he leaves it to her in order to take out the bullet farmer and snipe him out and everything. Like, everybody in this world has their own version of masculinity, as far as the author says, and it is an interesting way to look at it. I guess the way that she means masculinity is kind of like meaning, how do they own their violence? How do they own their aggression? And we see that when women take on a different version of their gender norm, instead of being the wives, they become freedom fighters. And same with Furiosa. And Max becomes somebody who's less attuned to taking life and more attuned to giving it. Like, at the end, he's able to use that full life blood he has as a transfusion to help save Furiosa's life. And we see Nux. He goes from being this loud, afraid boy, which is kind of what puts him in this cult, like a lot of other afraid boys who are in this cult of personality that we see today. He ends up becoming calm and peaceful and more of a loving individual. And that's what leads him to become the best version and the last version of himself. It's noted that the way that this revolution succeeds is because all of the characters stray from their gender norms and their normal idea of masculinity. And I was like, huh.
Yeah, I think it's also important to realize that they're only able to accomplish this together. There's no one person that has to do everything. There is no Immortan Joe in this group. It is definitely a group effort, and that's kind of like socialism, right? We have to work together to improve our circumstances, and we do see this. And also, Max, if you look at the 3 previous films, they're very much, white male savior shows up, saves the day, and it's just like an action fest with cars and stuff. Great films, but this one really empowered these female characters, and Max absolutely helps and is vital to the success of this group. But he's just caught up in it. It's not his story. It's not his mission. It's just very much him assisting them in accomplishing their goal. And I thought that was great. I like the idea that, he's just here for the ride to help them along when it's really not in his benefit, except to redeem himself.
Yeah. And Max's whole arc comes from his growth. In the previous story, he helped this woman and her daughter and decides that he's not going to go back. Now, in this story, he's given the same opportunity. He and the crew, the wives, and Furiosa, minus Angarad, one of the wives.
The wife, the one that...
Yeah, the one that was pregnant with the perfect baby for Immortan Joe. Yeah,
yep.
She ends up dying. Let's cover that real quick while we're on it. So, she dies because of Max, right?
Not necessarily. She keeps putting herself in danger. She is very much a leader. She's a leader.
No, she is, yes.
She's the leader amongst these wives. She's the one that has stood up time and time again, and she said this baby will not, be raised by Joe. I would rather die trying to escape than let that happen. She even puts herself between a bullet for her and for Furiosa, right? She uses her own body as a shield. And
that's great to capitalize on the weakness of Joe.
Yeah, he won't pull that trigger because, that's his favorite wife who's pregnant with his possibly healthy child. And he holds back, and she knows this, and she uses it against him. But Max is driving when she, does fall from the truck, unfortunately.
She slipped.
Yeah.
On blood.
Yep.
From the shot he grazed her with earlier in the film.
Yeah.
So Max killed her. That's all I'm trying to say. That's all I'm trying to say is Max killed her. No, but you're right. Like, she wouldn't have been in that position if she wasn't such a strong character. She definitely put herself there, and I really love, once again, how she capitalized on Joe's misogyny. His misogyny was, that child is my property, which he says something similar to that in the film, and because she isn't viewed as anything more than an incubator for that child, she puts her body in the way. There's a good chance if she wasn't pregnant, he still might have shot. But he didn't, because she was there. Yeah,
and then she falls from the truck and unfortunately goes under the wheels of Joe's vehicle. And I think she actually doesn't die immediately, right? She's dying, and they try to take the baby, right, and see if they can save it.
Yeah, which this bullshit article also noted that like they were just interested in the baby and not the person. Which it's so funny. It's such a problematically.
That's true though, right? Like, that's what Joe really wants, and I think they say the baby was healthy, right? He's a healthy boy in all ways.
Well, yeah, Joe is interested. In the article, they relate him more to people who are quote unquote selling baby parts for profit, which isn't actually happening. Yeah, like selling.
Is this really going in the show notes?
No, yeah, it's in the show notes. I want people to know the stupid shit that's out there. It is ridiculous. And I also, like I said, I also have a something rebuking that or debunking that. It does also say in that problematic article, Miller manages to inject a genuine feminist perspective, offering an implicit rebuke not only to oppressive patriarchal states, super woke for what is essentially a very conservative article.
Absolutely.
but to ongoing sexism and objectification of women in Hollywood blockbusters, and by extension, the wider media culture from advertising to pornography. Always have to beat down sex work when you can. But it is really interesting that, like, they say that, like, yeah, that this version of the movie, like, you would have expected something like, like Max and Furiosa to end up getting together, like a typical movie with a strong woman and a strong man in the lead would have, but this doesn't do that.
No, I mean, there's definitely a connection there. I think they have some really great quiet moments, like when he's cupping her head as he's giving her the blood transfusion, or they look at each other, and they definitely, they work together so well. They're in sync a lot of times, but it never becomes romantic, and it doesn't need to.
No, not at all. And I love how when he is cupping her head, as he's giving her the transfusion, he says, "Max, my name is Max." Like,
yeah, but it's almost uncertain, right? Like, it's like he hasn't said it in so long that it almost feels like strange to him to be telling her his name.
You're blowing my mind right now. Wow, you're right. He was very uncertain about it. Like, maybe he just found his identity in helping this group. In Furiosa helped him rediscover who he is, because as a cop in 19 whatever's Australia, I think he was all about, I'm gonna help people. And we mentioned before that cops in shows and movies are very different from cops in real life. So but yeah, like, Max wants to help people. He believes in justice, and he kind of found himself again by doing that, by helping people.
Well, he has a hero complex. I mean, he has failed time and time again. He failed saving his wife and child. He failed to save this little girl and her mother in the comic, that he sees flashbacks of. He's made mistakes time and time again. There's a really cool theory going around that he was actually the wild boy from the second movie, the Road Warrior.
Oh, and that he had the narrator?
Yeah, and he had inherited, Max's jacket, and that's why he's saying the name so strangely, because now that Max is dead, he's becoming Max. But unfortunately, Miller did say that's not true, but he thought it was a really cool theory.
I actually really would have loved that, too.
Yeah, I would have been fine with it.
He was a wild boy. He couldn't really talk, and, throughout the whole movie, he is, he's narrating it as an adult. Yeah. So even, like, if Fury Road was injected into that canon, like, this version of quote unquote Max, Tom Hardy, still wouldn't be that, that grown man yet. He's still, like,
on his journey there.
Yeah, he barely talks. And because at the very beginning of the movie, he narrates, and he said, he has some pretty full sentences there. Wow, what a cool. I would really like that. I'm not mad, but
yeah. George Miller seemed really impressed with it. He was like, "Wow, that's awesome," but not what I planned. So
should have wrote that.
I think it's just it's almost like a reboot of the character. He's trying to
partially
change it up a little bit. But I love Tom Hardy's performance. I think especially for having so little lines, he has some great facial expressions. He's got this, like, manic energy, and he does a really, really great job in it.
And I want to talk about him going back later on in the story. In the movie, we learn that the wives in Furiosa are trying to get to this oasis called the Green Place. It's where Furiosa comes from. It's where she was born, and she was a member of all of these fucking badass pistol-packing mamas called the Vuvolini. And when they finally get there, it's not the Green Place. It turns out they actually went past what used to be the oasis. And we see all these women there who have motorcycles and guns. And, if we're continuing into this whole critique of feminism and masculinity, the gun plays a huge part. And like every action movie, it's very much about, it's a phallic symbol, and it's used to take life. It's even brought up by, is it the Dag? In this movie, how she calls it, who calls it the anti-seed?
It might be the Dag.
It might be the Dag. So one of the wives, they do call it the guns and bullets the anti-seed. You plant something and you watch it die, and you can see she's kind of a little disappointed with the Vuvolini, because they all have guns and they use them as well, and And one of them, she's the keeper of the seeds. She says, well, come over here. And she shows her all of these seeds that she has. And she's like,
Yeah, that's great.
Back when everyone was supplied for, you used to be able to plant a seed and everybody would have everything they needed. Like the world they're in is just inhospitable to those seeds. Like you can't plant that life now. You can't create that life now.
You can't.
But she's fighting for a world where hopefully you'll be able to. She still has that hope. And we do see that these women, it's kind of their own version of necropolitics. When they get their guns, now guess what? They also control who lives and who dies. Like in this movie, it's kind of the great equalizer.
Yeah, it really is. And it's at this point when they realize the green place is no longer habitable. It's like a poisonous swamp, right? The new plan is to just ride off as far as they can get, right? Across the desert. I think they said like 160 miles they can make it. And this is where Max kind of realizes that is a hopeless plan. He has been out in the wasteland all these years, right? They've been in the Citadel.
He knows what it's like out there.
Yeah, he knows that there is no place to go. It's just more death and radiation. So that's when he makes a decision to go after them, not to leave them. And he says to Furiosa, you have the place to take. It's the Citadel. That's where your home should be. You need to reclaim that for you and the people. And he's like, I'll help you. He puts his hand out to her. We can do this together. And she takes his hand, and that's the new plan. They're gonna ride back the way they came into Joe's forces to get to the Citadel while all his forces are out on the road and take it before they can get back.
This whole film is beautiful visually, but that also is just great because, in your typical movie, you might have them hug, or maybe that's the moment where the kiss happens. And no, this is straight business, bro. Like Furiosa and him, Dylan, you son of a bitch. That's what, they give that handshake and they get to work. And this is similar to that whole argument of like people saying, oh, well, if the country stays the way it is, I'm going to leave. And they're trying to leave the Citadel, which despite the system in place is a pretty hospitable area, especially in this wasteland. Like even no matter how bad it is there, people are still going there. Kind of reminds me of immigration, right? Like there are people who are leaving terrible situations just to come to our fucked up country. To live, to be in a slightly less terrible situation, hopefully. Like
because as bad as it is, it's still a little better, right?
Yeah.
And they decide they're going to fix the system, though.
Yeah. So and that's what they do. It's this argument of like, do you leave or do you stay and fix it? And they decide, you know what, we're going to go and fix it. And there's, like you said, pulse pounding, riveting action, and it does come to this point where Furiosa, she uses that arm, which kind of defines her character. You know what I mean? She is defined by her open resistance, if that makes sense. Because nobody gets their arm chopped off for no reason.
Yeah, exactly. You don't see any other wives with chopped off arms. It's her.
You don't see any other imperators with chopped off arms either. All the people with the black paint on the top part of their head. So she uses that, and she has this moment where she says to him, "Remember me?" And it is, I guess, a fair question to ask, because the axe soon forgets, but the tree always remembers. Like she'll always remember him no matter what. But I don't think he ever forgot her. I always saw her as the woman who said no, and maybe I thought she said no to being a wife any longer, and that's how she got her arm cut off. But you was it confirmed that it was because she was infertile or no?
That's what she said in a interview. So
in an interview,
I don't think we're gonna really know until the film comes out.
Well, yeah. So, but I mean, regardless, she still led this rebellion, and yeah, like he remembers her. All right.
I almost took it as she was saying, "Remember me." Not asking, more like telling him. I don't know.
Oh, shit!
I was
that's
listening
even
to it.
better, dude. That's awesome. I love your fucking analysis of this film. We mentioned that Max is the one to give life to her. Normally a female role, typically. Now he's the one to give life. He's the one to find new meaning, and
he's giving back to her because she only was dying because she saved him. She caught him as he was falling off the rig. and got stabbed in the side. So she almost died to save him, and he was giving it back to her.
At the end of this one article, not the bullshit one, the like feminist one, it said the socialist revolution must first be a gender revolution. And it was interesting because it uses the end of this movie to talk about that, how like by liberating the women, the men have been able to liberate themselves, and they've also been able to liberate everybody else there.
I like that.
Yes, I also think race is involved there, and then with race
Definitely.
and gender, there's also class. Like I think it's all kind of together. But I definitely think gender is a huge part of that revolution. And when they finally get back to the Citadel, they reveal that Immortan Joe is dead. Their leader and provider is dead.
And how quickly the people turn, right?
Oh yeah, the people right away are like, let them up. And they want Furiosa and the wives and maybe Max. I don't think they know who Max is. I don't think they care. Let them up because
they're cheering her name. They're saying, he's holding her up.
Oh yeah, they are cheering Furiosa.
And they're like, Furiosa! And she's stumbling onto the roof, and Max is, he's holding her a little bit from the side, but she's the one they're all cheering. She's this symbol of strength.
Yeah, and in this socialist fantasy, the whole thing ends with them literally seizing the means of production, which the people who are loyal to Joe, they don't want to happen. Like one of Joe's sons is still in the Citadel. Yeah. You'd think he would be like, no, don't let him up. I'm going to be the leader. But it's the workers who decide to let them up. They get on that treadmill and they start pulling their levers, and it's the children, the war pups, not the war boys either. The war pups are like, all right, like let's go. Let's let Furiosa up. Let's usher in a new age. Like guess what? You may think these ideas are radical, but more people than you know, they want a more just society. They want progressivism. They want a future.
Yeah, they might be afraid to say it, right? They might be afraid of the consequences, but they want it. And I love as they're riding up this lift, they're pulling all these people up with them, right? The wives are grabbing people out of the crowd and pulling them onto the lift, and everybody's welcome now.
Yeah, rising tide raises all ships. And I now there's this moment here where Max sneaks off of the lift and kind of fades into the crowd. I don't know why I'm getting emotional about it right now. I was never emotional.
Well, him and Furiosa share that look, and they nod at each other.
It is great. And like this is another case where like he could stay, but I do really think that Max is representative of a bygone era. That while there are good things about him and good things about his idea of masculinity or aggression or whatever it may be, that his way of doing things is still done. He's been clinging on to that old cop Max. Yeah. He's not meant for this world. And even though he is an ally, it's up to the liberated to build the new world.
Absolutely. And I think as a character, he wouldn't be comfortable settling. I think he has too many demons, he has too much that he is still trying to make up for, and he needs to wander. He's the road warrior, he can't just stay in one place. And he knows Furiosa. I mean, I think there's just such a respect between him and Furiosa. He knows that with her there, he doesn't need to be. She is more than strong enough to help lead this movement. And so are the other wives, but I just love the connection he has with her throughout the movie. They have that great fight when he first confronts her. They're going back and forth. It's so good, with the wives trying to attack him, and then Nux is trying to help him, but it really comes down to him and Furiosa just brutally fighting, and then they constantly have to team up, and she teaches him that she entrusts him with the code for the truck. She tells him, you take off if you have to. She says, I'll scream fool because you won't tell me your name. And she gives him the code. She trusts him with that. And as soon as she screams fool, he is in that driver's seat taking off. And then as they're escaping, right, they have that, they're in sync. They're shooting over each other and great, exchanging guns and helping each other out. And they have such a great camaraderie there. And I think, I thought that was excellent. The way they just right off the bat, they could just work together so well and back each other up constantly.
And that just plays also into how great the choreography was in this movie. I mean, a lot of this film is visually stunning. It's awesome. He uses a lot of practical effects.
Yep. I mean, it's one giant car chase.
That's all it is.
Yeah, the entire movie is almost the entire movie is on vehicles. Riding across the desert, which is just insane, with very little dialogue, and just these crazy action moments and set pieces, and you got a guy in a guitar with the flames coming out of it, hanging from the top of one truck, and I mean it's just absolutely bonkers.
Oh man, and like because I love like martial arts movies and stuff like that, but like sometimes you do see stuff that is just too clean, like. Like when you have like your John Wick 3s has so much fighting in it and stuff. But like at a point it gets to be exhausting. Like this movie constantly keeps you guessing because they're not fighters, they're survivors, and they're like using everything they can get and blah, and like, oh, we got the bolt cutters, we got the hose with water,
yeah.
we got Max getting hit upside the mask and everything, and Furiosa's locking his neck down with her stub and everything. It was so great.
And everyone's helping, right? There's at one point where they're surrounded and Furiosa and Max are firing every shot they have. She gives the rifle, she's like, reload it. And I think it's Angara, the pregnant one, says, I can't, right? And then Toast takes and she's loading the gun, and they're even trying to help out. Furiosa's like, give me the gun, and she's like, it's not ready. Max pops up, he helps her out, and they're at the very end, especially everyone is fighting. They're doing everything they can to survive and to help, and I love seeing that. It was awesome, and each of the wives has like a little distinct thing about them that they stand out. There's one that's Cheeto the Fragile, and she's the one that says we should go back. We can't do this. Let's just go back to him. And, they convince her that it's not the right move, that they have to, fight for their survival. And almost at the end, she says to Rictus, take me, Rictus. And he grabs her. And you think, wow, she has given up. She's going back with him. But she only did it so she could help Furiosa get onto Joe's truck. And it was like, it's so good seeing them all come together and be so strong.
It's like you said in a previous episode that everybody has their role to play in the revolution. Like, not everybody's going to be, the Max or the Furiosa. A lot of you might be the wives who are, who have to, reload and supply resources. You might be Nux. You might, or you might be out there on the front lines. It's, everybody has a different role to play, but as long as they're playing those roles together, that's really what's going to help. And
absolutely,
it was awesome, and it flowed so well. And
I know you mentioned this too, but. It is worth really looking at the fact that all of the leaders, Joe's leaders, except for Furiosa, really, are like older white men, right? The Bullet Farmer, the Man Eater from Gasoline Town, like they're all these older white, conservative men who are running things, and they have to be, systematically toppled one by one in order to really win their freedom.
And if Immortan Joe is truly a representative of capitalism, an avatar for capitalism, then he's the one who put these men in their place. We find out in the prequel comic that the only reason those guys are in power is because Joe put them there. Capitalism set them up to be there. One of them was a traitor to his people and ended up being put in charge of fuel, and they call it gasoline. And the other guy, he was put in charge of munitions and mining lead, and he's known as the Bullet Farmer, very similar to our military industrial complex. Like, it's all right there in front of us. I don't know how I didn't recognize a lot of it in the first watch I had of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're not looking forward, if you're not paying attention to those things, it's easy to miss and just say, oh, it was a really cool action movie. But obviously, there's a lot more to it. And it is a really cool action movie. They pull off some amazing stunts, beautiful set pieces. It just, it's gorgeous to watch. It's, I said that earlier. It's like nonstop. You have to pay attention to every moment because you don't know what's going to happen next.
And apparently, it's also a socialist wet dream, which I didn't realize from the beginning, but from the first watch. But here we are, and I'm glad it worked out that way.
Yeah, me too.
So do you have anything else you'd like to cover from Mad Max Fury Road?
I do like one little moment when Furiosa is trying to make her deal for them to, get past and have the rocks blown behind them to block Joe. At this point, she hasn't had, the oil, the smudge on her face. She's kind of become, a different person. but she takes a moment, she smears it across her eyes, and she looks in the mirror, and she kind of looks at herself, and that's the old Furiosa, the one that she's trying to break away from. I just thought that was a really cool little nuance, a little moment there.
Wow, that's great. I didn't even realize that. Thanks for bringing it up. But yeah, you're right. Like, she is becoming an individual again. She's becoming something else. But in order to maintain the looks of being an imperator, she has to put the grease back on her face. But I didn't even acknowledge that she looks back at herself like that. That was great.
Otherwise, I do want to recommend the movie to anyone listening if they haven't seen it. It's a really, really good time. There's some really great moments, and just has a great message too.
I might go back and rewatch the other Mad Max movies. Maybe we could do that as like a fun little.
I actually am about to. I have the trilogy out right now.
All right. Well, that being said, definitely take a look at this movie. You can find all of our show notes and sources at politipoppodcast.wordpress.com. A lot of my commentary on the film was based on those sources, so you can definitely check those out. You can listen to us and rate and review us, please, on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or the iHeartRadio app. You could find us on Twitter at PolitiPopPod, find us on Instagram at PolitiPopPodcast, or email us at politipopcast@gmail.com. If you want to let us know what you think of the show, let us know if you agree with what we're saying, let us know if you disagree with what we're saying, and we're a bunch of socialist beta male cuck soy boys. Which we are some of those things, I think, actually. But that being said, this was fantastic. Thanks so much for listening and tuning in, and thank you to Antonia Little for logo design as well. Today we are going to be writing out on "Help I'm Alive" by Metric. If you check out that song and the lyrics, I think you'll see that it is very reminiscent of the themes within this movie. For the Politipop Podcast, I've been Mike Booch.
And I've been Ty.
And remember, no matter what you're reading, what you're watching, what you're listening to, always remember to never stop thinking, never stop learning. Look up weird, conservative, but anti-patriarchal articles, but also scholarly articles. And don't forget to read between the lines.
Yeah. If you're listening and you haven't seen the movie, obviously beware of spoilers and go watch it.
Can we make that a regular thing that you say that?
We probably should, right?
That sounded so great. It came out so right. Oh, my God. Yes. So he helps her get his daughter back, and he's also...
her daughter back.
He helps her get her daughter back. That's his big thing. But this really brought to me the idea of... Sorry, that doesn't make any fucking sense. Does it? I don't think it makes any sense. Do you want to talk about one of the other people who said no, or do you want to get to her a little bit later on?
What do you mean?
Furiosa.
Oh, sure. We can talk about Furiosa, yeah.
And I do like that Furiosa... I do like something about her. I'll tell you that.
She's cool. She's real cool.
I do like something about Furiosa.
Oh, I got such a burp right out. Sorry.
Oh, that's my man. Yep. No, get it out, buddy.
Got that gas.
All right. Yes. Yeah, his mother died of being sick from all the radioactive waste. What is it?
Radiation?
Duh. You're blowing my world right now. Sorry, right now. You're blowing my mind right now. Because it's like you said in our last episode, the last housekeeping episode, or was it the V for Vendetta episode?
And scene.
Oh, there he is.